My name's Helen. I look after the wellbeing services at Grit. But today I'm just here to introduce you to everybody. I just wanted to start the very quick bit of housekeeping, if that's okay. As you've just seen, the webinar is being recorded. It will be made available for public viewing afterwards. It will be going on to YouTube and our website. So if you would rather not be seen on the recording, that's not a problem. Just let us know, put it in the chat. And we'll sort that out. The presentation today will last roughly 45 minutes. If you have any questions, please do use the chat box, drop them in. We're going to have lots of opportunities to answer those as well. Please, we're very happy if you want to keep your camera on. We love seeing faces, but if you are able to, please do mute your microphone. And that's it. And I'm just going to hand you over now to Teresa Mullen to kick off today's webinar.
Yeah, hi there. Sean, are you having any joy at all with this now? Oh, fantastic. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, well, as I say, hello, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. As Helen said, please, if you've got any questions in relation to critical risk management, burning questions, or things that you're struggling with right now, start popping those into the chat box, because then as we go through our presentation, we can make sure that we capture anything that you are, needing answers to or struggling with or really challenged with at the moment. And if we don't cover those, or if you've got something that you want to talk about confidentially, any one of you at the end of this session can just drop us a message, drop us an email, and we can pop in a consulting call with you absolutely free of charge to support you and help you to answer any direct questions that you might have that you might not necessarily want to share on this webinar. So do take advantage of that. And if there's one of us in particular that you'd like to have that call with, please just let us know that in the chat as well. So I'm going to just start introducing what we're going to talk about right now. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Teresa and I'm the CEO of Grit UK and Grit USA. And today what I want to do is start what I believe to be an extremely important conversation, and one that I really don't think we're having enough of. We're only just out of January, and already we're seeing serious accidents, major failures, reputational disasters making headlines from our companies. Not necessarily companies with weak safety records or poor cultures. These are organizations just like ours with strong processes, top tier risk management strategies, and well-documented policies. So why is this happening? Well, if you are familiar with any of the work that we do here at Grit, you will be aware that there is always a difference between how we as leaders imagine work is being done out there at the sharp end of our business and the reality, how our workers are actually varying, flexing, and adapting to get the job done. And of course, what drives those behaviors is our focus on successful outcomes. So, if the product gets delivered on time, the work gets completed successfully, then we're happy and we move on, and we may not be asking the right questions. Now, normally and typically, drift is always working, and that's what this phenomenon is called, organizational drift. It's usually working in our favor as an organization. It is the way we get work done. The problem with drift is that if we are trying to mitigate risks based on work as imagined, and there is a delta between our strategy and the execution of work, then there's a chance that we might be looking in the wrong direction when things go wrong. And that's something that we all really need to be aware of. The leaders of companies in the headlines so far this year, and you know who those companies are, you've been seeing the headlines the same as we are. They would have been exactly where we are today. They would have trusted their dashboards. They would have thought that their reports were accurate. They would be sitting thinking that their procedures and their risk control measures are robust and that their people are working in accordance with the rules and the regulations and so on and so forth. So none of those leaders would have been expecting some of those disasters that we've heard about so far this year. And the problem is that risk doesn't live in an Excel spreadsheet. We all know that. It lives in the real world. It lives where people carry out work at the sharp end of our business. It's where poor decisions get made under pressure, or where small shortcuts have the potential to result in major catastrophes. And when those things go wrong, there's a risk that they're going to make front page news. So here's the question. How do we close the gap? How do we move from assuming that the work our people is doing is safe to knowing that we are managing our most critical risks in an effective way? And let's not forget that not all risks are equal. We need to focus more on what we at Grit call our people and our business killers. We need to understand what work really looks like from our workforce's perspective, and then we can develop risk management strategies that go way beyond prevention. So yeah, we need to go beyond prevention. Not enough organizations today are asking this question, and I want you to start asking it. What happens when all of our risk control measures fail, and how will we reduce the consequence, or how will we recover? So I'm just going to repeat that question. What happens when all of our risk control measures fail? How will we reduce the consequence, and how will we recover? We're not comfortable with questions like that because we put so much faith in our prevention strategies. The issue is, it's when those prevention strategies fail that we make the headlines. So to give you a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about here, and this is just an analogy, a very plain and simple analogy. Think about working from height. Now, most of our organizations would mandate something like, obviously, our first step would be trying to eliminate the requirement to work at height. But then we would start to look at prevention. How can we prevent people falling or prevent items dropping from height? The next step on from that is that we would say, okay, well, we want people to wear fall arrest. Yeah, so we've kind of got a couple of levels of defense in there. I'm sure you'd agree. Where I want you to go to in the future is what happens when we've got someone suspended in a harness. We've got maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get them down without long-term injury. And that's really where we need to be. What happens when the prevention fails and now we have somebody suspended, or whatever the equivalent of that is in your organization? So as health and safety community and as an operations management community, we need to go beyond prevention. That is so important if we're to prevent these things from happening. But what happens? Well, we spend so much time focusing on the small stuff. You know, the cut fingers, the minor slips, trips and falls, the sprained ankles, and so on and so forth, that we forget how much more significant the consequences are when the really bad things happen. Now, I'm not saying that we should tolerate minor injuries or non-high potential events. Please believe me. But the message I want to leave you with before I hand over to my colleagues is broken leg is better than dead. Now, that's a really hard conversation to have with our operational peers, but it's one that we need to start having if we're going to really get uncomfortable about our risk management strategies and how they're working today. So that's exactly what we're here to talk about. We're not here to point fingers. We're not going to dwell on failure, but we're going to explore some real practical solutions that can help prevent your next crisis, because none of us want to wake up tomorrow morning and see our own companies making the headlines. Before we dive into the presentation proper, I want to be really clear. This session is about you. It's not about us We're not here to flog you anything. That's not what this is about. We're really concerned, and I think rightfully so, what we're seeing in not just our own client organizations, but organizations all over the world. We are seeing that critical risks are not being managed as effectively as perhaps our leaders, our health and safety leaders, and our operational leaders think we are. We work with leading organizations across multiple industries all over the world, tackling some of the toughest operational and safety challenges. So tonight, we want to bring our best advice and our experience to you completely free of charge. So I want to make sure that, as I said at the beginning, this is really valuable to you. So whilst we're talking, if anything comes into your mind or there's anything you're grappling with right now, start popping those questions or thoughts into that chat box now. At the end, we'll have time for some questions and answers. And I'll just reiterate, if you would like to have a one-to-one conversation with myself, Phil, who you're going to meet shortly, or RJ, please let us know in the chat and we'll get in touch with you and set something up for you. So let me start by sharing the slides that I've got to share. Any of you who know me know that I'm really terrible when it comes to anything techie. So bear with me. And Phil, thumbs up or thumbs down. Does that look about right? Fantastic. He always keeps an eye on me. So what are we going to talk about? What I would like you to think about are these questions. What is your definition of a critical risk, your organization? Let me just let some people in here. What methods are used to identify your critical risks at the moment? And do you have a framework or a consistent process for managing them? Oh, that didn't do very well, did it? Next question is, how do your workers know if they are involved in a critical risk, task, or activity? So the reason I'm asking that question is, I want you to really think about, how would I want my workers to feel if they know that they are being exposed to something that has the potential to kill them? And those are the things that we're talking about today. The events, the bad outcomes that have the potential to seriously injure or kill our people or our business. Okay, so not just health and safety accidents, but the big hitters that could really damage us as an organization. How effective is your management of change when it comes to these critical risks? So do you have some sort of system that says, okay, we're changing a piece of equipment, we're changing a piece of plant, we're bringing in some new technology, which has the potential to impact this critical risk. And now we need to really assess the impact. Do our risk strategies need to change? Do we need to put more controls in place? So on and so forth. So I want you to be thinking about those and how they're connected. What is your data telling you today about the effectiveness of your critical risk controls? Is all your KPIs green? Is everything looking great? Is the scores high? The accident statistics seem to be down, and so on and so forth. What I'm advising you to do, and not enough people are taking this on board, is don't trust it. Don't trust your data at face value. Get the information, take it out to the sharp end of your business and go and check by speaking to your people. I'm going to talk a lot more about that. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to my business partner and my amazing colleague, RJ. RJ is based over in Wyoming. So for any of you who are joining us from stateside, he's on the same time zone as you. He's still looking great. We're looking like we're ready to go to bed. And he's going to talk to you about risk as imagined versus risk as done. Thank you, RJ.
Absolutely. Thank you, Teresa. Yes. So when we talk about this risk management strategy or this drift phenomena, usually what we see is organizations do a really, really good job of building a risk management strategy from a work as imagined perspective. And to illustrate this point, I want to use these two pictures. So what we're doing now in this exercise is we're just trying to find 10 similarities between these two pictures. Right? Most of you are probably thinking, okay, there's mountains in both pictures, there's sky, there's blue, there's trees, there's grass in both pictures. Right? We could go on and we could probably find at least 10 similarities between the two pictures. But also, and just as importantly, there's probably 10 differences between the two pictures, right? So we have these two pictures here. And there's a contrast, right? One is from the ground level, one's clearly from a plane or very high elevation, and the perspectives are different, right? But what if I told you that these two pictures were of the exact same place? Seems pretty believable. And in fact, I took both pictures personally. I took the picture on the right when I was hunting one evening in the meadow, signified by the star in the left-hand picture. I was flying over this mountain range where I hunted one season as I was headed to the airport in Denver, Colorado. And so, in fact, both the pictures are looking at each other. Essentially. So the picture from the left, I am facing the southwest, and the picture on the right, I'm facing northeast. And so the views are actually opposite and opposing as well. Now, I usually ask folks which perspective is more important if I have a specific objective. Which one am I going to take into consideration if, let's say, for instance, we need to navigate from this meadow I'm in to a lake on the other side of the mountains? Which perspective is more valuable? Most people I ask say, oh, I want the 20,000 foot view to build a strategic plan. It's going to tell me the elevations. It's going to show me more terrain features. I'm going to be able to make more strategic decisions with this 20,000 foot view on the left. And that's not wrong, right? That's a very valuable perspective to have. And we need that perspective as an organization, right? If we use this analogy for our organizations, this is the executive leadership team, right? Having this 20,000 foot view of what the market trends look like, what our projected revenues look like, what do our customer sales trends look like, right? This is the view that's very important to our organization. But usually what happens in our organizations is that this is the same level we build our risk management strategies around. Right? And we have this 20,000 foot view in our risk management strategies because our executive teams and our leaders have laid out a very strategic plan on how we're going to execute work. Right? So for example, if I'm using this left-hand picture and my objective is to get from the star to the X, as a 20,000 foot view leader, I'm going to tell my people, okay, I want you to take the least amount of elevation gain as possible, so you expend the least amount of energy. So I'm going to have you move around to the south, take the lowest pass possible, and then we can walk downhill into this lake that's signified by the X, right? Makes a lot of sense from that perspective. Right? But the problem is, if you're the person on the ground in the right-hand side picture, you know from your experience, like I do, if you're walking around the forests of northern Colorado, such as in this picture, right, what happens there is the pine trees are kind of thin and brittle. And so when a big gust of wind comes, it knocks over these trees, and these trees litter the forest floor. Right? And so you end up having to walk through what we call blowdown. It's these 40-foot trees that look like the game of pickup sticks, right? Where you're navigating over and through and around these obstacles. So from a ground level perspective, it makes more sense to me as an operator to reduce the amount of time I have to spend walking over these obstacles in my way to execute my objective. Right? Now, what happens is I know my critical risks as an operator on the ground. I know which ones I'm willing to take. I'm more willing to climb over those two peaks or those two summits than I am to walk through the blowdown. But as an organization, we don't have any conduit to get that information from the bottom to the top. And so our risk management strategy is trying to protect people against a specific risk without understanding the real risks they're taking. Right? Continuing with the analogy, the risks associated with this objective task, right, is the deadfall I mentioned, possibly cliff faces that we have to navigate. Right? What about animals? Right? There could be predators in these woods that our people might have to face. Or elevation gain and loss multiple times. Right? What about fuel, food? Are we going to have enough fuel to actually keep our people healthy during this? Right? What about water? Right? A lack of water in this scenario could really put our people at risk. Right? So we have to, as an organization, really truly understand how our people are executing the work to get a more accurate understanding of our risk management strategies. If you go to the next slide, these critical risk tools that we're going to present to you today are the tools that we use, and we're going to show you best practices that organizations are using to implement these critical risk tools to connect the top of your organizations with the bottom of your organizations. Because what's happening in these tragic events is the bottom of the organization couldn't get their message to the top. Right? And not just the most local or most recent events, right? I think of scenarios that this caused catastrophic failures in organizations like Boeing and the 747 or 737 MAX issue, right? Peter Robinson does a great job of laying out this entire story of the 737 MAX in his book, Flying Blind. And he really talks about how the top of the organization was focused on this market strategy that was going to help the organization become more effective in the industry. And they completely failed to listen to their bottom level engineers and assembly line workers. And it created this worldwide reputational issue with Boeing. Another one that is very prominent, most of us are familiar with, is the Deepwater Horizon issue. Right? For all intents and purposes, the corporate safety teams, the corporate leaders saw green on the dashboards. Everything looked good on paper. But the oil rig workers themselves were trying to wave flags and saying, hey, bad things are going to happen out here. Bad things are going to happen out here. There was no conduit. There was no tools for that organization to get the message up. Another one that is pretty familiar with most of us over the age of, say, 35 or 40 is Kodak, and how Kodak was on the verge of the technology for digital cameras. And they didn't strategically approach their use and the patent for digital cameras to keep their business and their reputation afloat, right? Because they didn't have an ear to the ground of their consumers and to their customers. And these are just some examples of how, without these critical risk management tools, organizations can find themselves floundering. And essentially, these tools are tools that align your strategy and execution to help you reduce this operational risk exposure. Now, to go deeper into these tools and what they are and some of the best practices that our industry and our client organizations are using, I'm going to turn it over to Phil to introduce you to these tools and some implementation strategies and tactics for you to be the most successful when implementing these tools.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, RJ. So I'm going to talk about these 3 tools and strategies. The first one is how to lead effectively in the field. It's a concept we simply call leading in the field, but it's an approach that you guys can all implement. is basically about spending time at the sharp end, pretty much as RJ has elaborated on. But it's not about directing and telling. It's more about quietly observing and listening without judgment. And when you do ask questions, they should be open and non-judgmental. For instance, you could say, why is this behind schedule? Or shouldn't you be doing it this way? And naturally, that puts you on the defensive. It's so more effective if you can ask questions such as, can you describe what challenges you're having? Or is there anything I can do to help? You can do this by recognizing and dismissing your own biases, which actually sounds quite difficult to do. But you'd probably sense this yourself. If you just listen and observe, you naturally get those moments to go, I understand now. And you start to learn the context and not just the facts. As we always say, context is king, because context informs you why people did what they did, not just what it was they did. Now, if you adopt this approach, you can start to identify instances of drift. In other words, why things are not being done by the book and by the procedures. And you start to understand what are the factors that are making people deviate and make those adaptations. Now, if you adopt this approach, you can look for and discuss these error-likely situations. All too often people turn a blind eye to those things, and you start to talk about the challenges of just doing an everyday task. A leader's role is, what I say, I've got a background in the military, and people seem to think that we just tell people what to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. Just directing is pretty tiresome for everybody. Leaders should not be like a vending machine of answers either. What's wrong with asking the workforce? I don't know. What do you think? It's about helping, asking, and advising. But yes, occasionally you sometimes do have to tell and direct. So what do you think the benefits of being an effective frontline leader and leading in the field? Well, first you get this free information. You understand the day-to-day operations, the challenges and the realities the employees face. In other words, what we call work as done. And this information or data can inform you to make more effective decisions, and it all feeds up to just strategic level as well. Get my teeth in. It's valuable workplace intelligence. I'll tell you a famous little story about a board member of a company in the States. And in all the meetings, he used to have a weekly meeting. He would always come up with these great ideas and suggestions and reveal things. And his colleagues used to go, how does he know all this stuff? And eventually sort of cornered him and said, how do you know all this? And it was as simple as the fact that most days to get to the other side of the plant, instead of going a shortcut through the corridors, he would walk through the shop floor. And he got to know people, he got to interact and ask them about the problems they were having every day. And bit by bit, this broke down the barriers, and he started to get this great information intelligence. Now, I was in our Royal Air Force, and it reminded me of how I did these things when I was the air safety manager for our aerobatic team, the Red Arrows. And I was appointed to be the air safety manager. As a role I knew nothing about. But I was sent on courses and I learned about the procedures, the software, the meetings I had to host or attend, and the data I had to crunch and work my way through. Now, I could have sat behind my desk and just done all these processes and procedures, but that is living in work as done. That's not reality. Or it's a little bit of reality, but not a great deal. So because I hated doing the desk work, I would get out and talk to people. I'd go on the hangar, I'd go into the crew rooms, I'd go onto the flight line and talk to people. Now, it was useful that I was a helicopter guy, so I wasn't an expert at flying jets, but, so I could ask those dumb questions. But I could have curious conversations, and I learnt about the problems of the hangar lighting. I learnt about the roof was leaking because the building was old and we were due to move. I also learnt of the self-induced pressure that a lot of the engineers felt to get 9 jets on that flight line. Because even though the boss was very approachable and very understanding, the people, I could sense that having a formation of 8 aircraft is akin to somebody smiling with a tooth missing. It just doesn't look right. So I realized there's a way here we had to try and defuse this self-induced pressure. Now, leading in the field builds on trust and it unlocks innovation. But you would need to explore your leadership style. You've got to ask yourself, are you authentic? Are you approachable? And if you don't know, well, ask your friends and peers, have those awkward conversations. Are you being as effective as you possibly can be? So where are the opportunities to learn? Well, as I keep saying, they're in curious conversations. And the way you ask those conversations and those techniques you can learn and gain from this, you can extract the real story. So that's leading in the field. And another thing, which is a great way to deal with critical risk, is having advocates of HOP, or HOP practitioners is another way of calling them, in your workplace. They are experts in these HOP processes and systems we have. And they can be taught a variety of tools and techniques and methods to uncover the reality of work. They can pass all this on to the rest of the workforce, how to listen effectively, how to have more effective questioning techniques, and how to look for those critical risks that are often can be quite hidden. So like I said, they become the subject matter experts and they have great influence, and they also spread these good practices. A good HOP practitioner is like gold dust, and they need to have good levels of emotional intelligence and engage with people in an approachable way, and they need to be relatable as well. Through all levels of the organization, they've got to feel comfortable having those kind of conversations from the very top to the lowest shop floor of the organization. Now, like I said, there's lots of tools and techniques and procedures they can use to help spread this good practices and share those techniques. And what you find is that people like this, or I've seen it myself, you start to change the language in your workplace. At first, people say, what do you mean by drift? And what do you mean, what is an error trap? And why do you keep saying blame fixes nothing? It's little factors like that, change in the language, which often defuses blame in the first place. And we start looking at the systems and the processes rather than looking at people. What have you done wrong? What have they done wrong? So it's incredible what can be achieved from doing that. Now, also, people who are trained in this or are HOP practitioners and advocates see the workplace differently. We talk about the HOP lenses that you put on, that actually things look differently. They aren't looking to eliminate instances of deviation from procedures, but instead they see them as drift and areas to learn, and they start to dig deeper and see, why are people adapting? What is causing these people to have to deviate from these rigid procedures? What are the influencing factor? Or has drift actually uncovered some good innovation that maybe we can use and tap into? A good HOP practitioner should also have a sound understanding of human nature and understand what is it that drives us to what we do. All too often in organizations, we get slapped with new things which just don't, make us roll our eyes and go, oh God, not again, from top down, from above. And people just don't like these sort of changes. And this is why a HOP practitioner can adapt these changes to really work and resonate with people. HOP practitioners also help run investigations, and they do it with a different approach, not by looking for blame, which is often how some investigations run. Who did what wrong? That should be the last area to look at. It's not concluding that the cause was human error. If an investigation says, oh, it was down to human error, well, that should be the start of why did that human make that error? Why did you not have something to catch that human error or to prevent it? What a good investigation should do is look at organizational factors. Have we set our people up for success? So what we need to look for is, when you start to do these sort of things, is look for system fixes that are enduring. If you try and fix human nature, that's a fool's errand. Just adding another layer of complexity, another process, another procedure, another thing to sign off, or indeed retraining somebody who's not suffering from skill fade, or disciplining somebody for a simple error, it actually causes lots of negative effects because you push people away and they just don't engage with it. HOP practitioners help improve workplace performance and their culture, but this approach actually helps identify and manage critical risks. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was learning teams. And if you haven't heard of them, I'm going to briefly describe them. Basically, you get a team of people together and they have a really healthy culture, and they harvest that workplace knowledge and expertise. And they do this because you have a facilitator who sets the ground rules, where you have to show mutual respect, and you collaborate, and this releases the innovation, and it bypasses traditional hierarchical ways of working. It's a safe place to disagree and challenge. And it's about learning from normal work. Because if you think about it, you can't really learn what went wrong just by looking at the procedure or the process. You want to know what's happening on that day. What was it like to be in that person's shoes? How are they coping with an imperfect working condition? Learning teams, you could describe them as being a bit like a CI event, but really they're far more effective to the way the composition of the team and also the culture. So ways you can use them. I'm sure you've all had place in your workplace where you've had instances of drift, i.e. why has that person not followed the procedure? Why have they deviated? Or complex tasks. We think, crikey, how are we going to tackle this? You know, a great place to have a learning team. Or error likely tasks that you just think that's bound to go wrong. Well, get a learning team to look at the likely problems and how you can mitigate them. Another one, I'm sure everybody in the room has experienced a near miss or a close call where something nearly went wrong. Well, if you keep having these, then a near miss or a close call is, in some ways, we describe it as a dress rehearsal for a catastrophic outcome. So do something about it. What about when something went really well and it was a bit of a surprise? Oh, that task or that quality or the output, the production's gone really well this week, but we've been short of a couple of people and other factors. So why did it go well? All too often people just shrug the shoulders and go, oh, well, that was good. Well, why not capture that learning, get a team together and really drill down? You might be surprised what you find. Also, high risk operation. You've got something that's really high risk. Well, get a learning team in. You can conduct a pre-mortem of what's the most likely bad thing that's going to go wrong. Better to do that in a classroom than somebody getting injured or seriously injured or killed. A challenging design problem, that's another area, or a new task. Do a dry run, a new procedure, highlight the pitfalls. Another really great area is repeat events. I'm sure you've all got things, or you sometimes go, oh, not that again. Oh, this is, these things that keep going wrong. Well, if you keep applying the same solutions and keep having repeat events, then you need to look at this from a different perspective. So how's a team made up? Well, I'll briefly describe it. You have about 5 to 7 people. Any more, it just gets lost. Any fewer, then it's just not enough diversity of thought. You need 2 or 3 people who aren't experts at whatever the issue, the problem, the scenario is, because they're the people who go, well, why do you do it that way, and why is that like that? And the facilitator should also be one of those people, because we don't want them to put their biases onto it. But excuse me, most importantly, we need 2 or 3 frontline workers who are the experts at what they do. And it's amazing once you put them into a scenario where people actually ask them about their job and the challenges and the problems, they just want to talk about it. And that mix of the experience and the experts and the people without the knowledge is where the magic happens and the solutions come out. And it can be done. The main part can be done in an afternoon of 2 or 3 hours, an overnight soak, and then the next the next morning is when you come out with the solutions. When you do the first afternoon, it's called the learn phase. You do not solutionize. You just find out what are the problems, what are the issues. And that means the frustration then comes spilling out the next day with all the solutions. Okay, I'm not going to describe it all in great detail, but learning teams are amazing things. And once you see them run, the innovation is quite jaw-dropping sometimes. So how does this help reduce critical risk? It's down to culture. All these tools help you improve the culture where people feel free to speak, come up with solutions, and identify and deal with problems. Okay, I think that's enough from me. I really want now to hand over to Teresa, who's going to conclude the session.
It helps if you unmute yourself. Thank you very much, Phil and RJ. That was really, really fantastic. Thank you. Some great information there for us. While I'm summarizing, please get those questions into the chat room right now. Have we covered something that you are interested in? is there something else that you want us to talk about? Obviously, we've got a limited amount of time here, but as I've said, we've got all the time in the world to help you on a one-to-one or during the sessions. So here are some reflection points for you to take away. There is always a gap between work as imagined and work as done. Always a gap. We have never ever been out into the field of one of our client organizations and read a procedure and watched an activity taking place and said, those are a mirror image. It just doesn't happen. And that happens from the top to the bottom of the organization, from the CEO's job right down to the people who are on your production line, on your construction site, digging holes, laying pipes, and whatever other work that you're involved in. There is always a gap between work as imagined and work as done. And that's the secret. When you can uncover that, that's when you're going to have a more accurate risk management strategy. We must go beyond prevention. And we have to do that, we have to assume that our controls will fail so that we can then start to focus on reducing the consequences and how are we going to recover? How are we going to bounce back from this thing when it goes wrong? And I really encourage you to really use that strong language when our prevention strategy fails. Don't use if, because while you've got an if, you've got a question. And you won't push yourself far enough to come up with the right answers. So if you've got a gap between your work as imagined and your work as done, and you're not currently going beyond prevention, you probably do have a gap between your risk control strategy and its execution. So just because you think that your confined space working in disease areas and so on are covered by that risk assessment, do not sit back on your laurels. Don't assume that you have robust controls in place and that they're going to be effective when they come up against work as done, that variation and flexibility from your workers. So Phil has shared 3 amazing tools that obviously we share with our clients and we encourage them to adopt. Which of those do you think that you could add to your strategy really quickly and most effectively? Most of you will have programs where your leaders are already spending time in the field. The bottom line is, it's very rare to see that done effectively. Very often our leaders will go out with their check sheet, do their inspection, do their safety, and it's the tick the box exercise. It's uncomfortable for them. It's uncomfortable for the people that they're observing or talking to. They don't have the skills, they don't have the tools to do it properly. But actually, you can really help by teaching your leaders how to be really effective when they're out there in the field. And one of the best things you can say to them is pretend you know nothing. Act like you know nothing, because the dumber you act, the more questions you're going to ask and the better you're going to listen to those answers, which leads you to ask more and more questions. So yeah, get leaders to be dumb in the field, perhaps. Not all risks are equal. You need to prioritize what we call your people and your business killers. So again, if you are spending all of your time wandering around, checking that people are wearing their ear defenders and their eye protection and so on and so forth, they might be important. They might be your critical risks or your critical risk control measures, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely that any PPE is protecting your people from something that's going to kill them, because PPE is our last line of defense. We all know that. It's not effective as a control measure. It is purely the last line of defense. So stop, dare I say it, stop looking for ear defenders and eye protection and gloves and God knows what else, and get out there and say, have we got the correctly rated equipment that we're using in disease areas? Are people leaving their mobile phones outside before they enter there? When we work in confined spaces, are we purging those vessels and those containers properly before someone goes in? Or is it a rush job and we just sent somebody in quickly to hose it down and now it's kind of fingers crossed? Never, ever let up on those things that have the potential to seriously injure or kill your people. It's a never-ending game. Remember, as much as it's very uncomfortable to have the conversation, my saying is, some of you will have heard this from me, a broken leg is better than dead. So hopefully from this, you're thinking about something that you can do tomorrow. So I just want to really cover off again what Phil's explained to you. These three tools, methodologies, approaches are really effective in closing that gap between the top of the organization, where you have all the decision making, all the authority, the budget, the power, with that bottom of the organization where you've got the knowledge and the experience, and building that bridge between the two. These are the three tools that we recommend you start to adopt. You don't have to do them perfectly, by the way. Just start them. You'll find your way. You will get good at it. You will perfect it. Find your way, but just start. Starting badly is better than never starting at all. Don't look for perfection. You will never achieve it. Just get going. And remember, when it comes to your critical risks, how can you really find out what are the things that kill your people or have the potential to kill your people or your organization? Ask your workers. So often they're the last people we go to. And then ask them, what do you currently do to prevent yourself being killed? Because guess what? They do that every day. That's their reality every single day. They're not always referring to your risk assessment on an A4 piece of paper and saying, oh, perhaps we should do this if we don't want to die today. They're dodging, ducking, and diving all the time without looking at that bit of paper. So ask them how they're doing that. Ask them what you can do to reduce the risk further, and then do it. Follow up. When you've done that and you followed up, get the feedback, adjust, try again, then move on to the next. You cannot eat this risk management, critical risk management elephant whole. So that's the end of our presentation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you, and we'll have a look. I think we might have some.
Teresa, real quick. Yeah, Craig asked a great question.
Okay.
We are great at reacting to bad events and communication of these. We're also not so great at making the same amount of noise about things that go well, either large scale or day to day. How do we instill the norm of discussing and learning from successful activities, which probably had errors within them? So I was going to jump on that real quick.
Please, RJ. Yeah.
Craig. Craig, this is a very common situation in all the organizations that we work with, right? And we call this learning from normal or successful work, right? And the very first thing that you have to do as either a leader or somebody who can influence leaders is warn leaders about what behaviors they are encouraging versus outcomes. Most organizations like to praise and reward people for outcomes, right? Successful work, but they have no idea the behaviors that they are reinforcing that achieved that successful work, right? So that's step number one, is just the awareness for leaders to say, hey, be careful of the behaviors that you're reinforcing based on outcomes. So that's absolutely step number one. And then learning teams are a great tool to learn from successful work. Right. So if you have those outliers of, hey, how did we get 20% more production out of this shift versus that shift? Hey, let's do a learning team on it. Let's learn and understand how they do it in normal everyday work. And you'll see some either best practices or you might see where areas where you need to install some more mitigation controls because they're maybe bumping up against the guardrails.
Thank you, RJ. That was brilliant. And yeah, Sean has asked another question. I'm going to whiz through some of these. So if we don't get to yours, you can hang on. We won't rush away. I know some of you will have to. It's late in the evening for some of you. So Sean is talking about there are many examples of both operational and safety leaders overlooking or resting on their laurels. One newish item that they are seeing in his organization is post-SIF near misses. Is the involvement of legal teams who may stifle efforts. Surely not, really, Sean. Okay, so this is the reality of corporate life. We have a legal team for very good reason. Their job is to protect us. I think just like HR, yeah. So we kind of put them all in that bucket. Believe it or not, they're there to protect us, keep us on within those guide rails, and do the best they can for us. Anything that happens in our organization, we have a right to defend ourselves and to, go if we're being taken to court, or even, dare I say it, to prosecute somebody else if we find that their actions were wanting. So, so we have to be very careful when we set out to investigate an incident or a near miss or anything like that, that we pause very briefly and say, what are we investigating and why? And what do we want the outcome to be? Now, what I always find is when I can have those conversations before I just blindly dive into my investigation, if I can have those conversations with my operational counterparts and the legal team before I've set foot in there, those conversations tend to go well. I can get what I want out of my investigation, and the legal team are normally satisfied or at least more comforted that we're not going to cross any of their guide rails. So again, just be mindful that just like we want to get in there and we want to learn and we want to prevent reoccurrence and we want to share the lessons and so on and so forth, sometimes when things go wrong in our organization, that's the last thing we should be doing. It's just a fact of life. Because you can get a week into your investigation and then suddenly you've laid out your own prosecution from your regulator, from your client, from whoever. So we do need to tread carefully. So my advice is, I understand that sometimes it can feel like, the legal team are stifling our efforts. Get into them as early as you can and work with them. And what we advise really helps is actually having a terms of reference for your investigation. So that everyone is very clear from the offset. What are we investigating? Why? What is the outcome of the investigation? And if the outcome is because we're going to prosecute somebody, let's be clear about it, because now we know who we can share that information with. So I hope that helps a little bit, Sean. But again, if not, if you've got something specific to talk about, please give us a shout. Okay.
Hey, Teresa, I was going to add to that one effective strategy we see for organizational learning when it comes to some of these really bad incidents where the legal team's like, all right, we're going to keep this under wraps, right? Is not learning about the specific incident, but learning around normal work for that task. Right. So let's say somebody was killed operating a crane. Well, I don't want to do a learning team on that specific incident. I would do a learning team on normal everyday crane operations. Right. And so I learn about what does normal work look like, or I would put an emphasis on leading in the field around crane operations. So our leaders are focusing on everyday work around maybe that task that led to an incident.
Yeah. And completely separate the two.
Yes, two separate things.
Keep the investigation and your learning opportunities as two separate entities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. If anybody wants to ask another question or give us some feedback or have a topic of discussion, you can unmute yourself and just come and talk to us. Or you can still pop it in the chat. We've got a few more minutes left. Now, there are some people on here that I cannot believe you're being quiet. Come on, I know that some of you have got questions. I know you too well.
Do you know, not a question, Teresa, but just a thank you to you and the guys for a really good seminar. You obviously know that we are in our organisation quite early on our journey on this, but we see the value of it, and it's been great to hear the perspective of Get the Grit, and it aligns a lot with what we're thinking. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to go and drop off.
No worries. Enjoy your
Thank you
evening,
so much,
Craig.
guys.
Thanks.
Thank you
Cheers.
very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, we will be hanging around for a few more minutes. If some of you want to leave us, that's fine. Look out for your emails tomorrow. We'll send you a summary and a link to the recording of this. So again, use that. It's content. You can use it to, trigger conversations with your teams. Please use it and share it with your colleagues. As I say, it's those conversations that we need to keep having. And the more uncomfortable you feel when you're having them, the closer you're getting to the truth.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you,
Nice to meet you.
Sean.
Cheers.
And
Thanks,
nice
Sean.
to meet you too, sir. Take care. Thank you.